Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today by Father Boquet, our president. Hello, Father.
Well, Colleen, as always, great to be with you once again, discussing things affecting life and family.
It's good to be with you also, Father. And today we're going to be discussing the upcoming Respect Marriage Act, which doesn't have anything to do with real marriage. And so let's just jump right into that, Father. What is this Respect Marriage Act?
Well, I put a couple of papers in front of me, so just so to kind of keep the timeline, in mind. So what I want to do is, the purpose of the article, Colleen, really was to make people aware of what's going on right now in the U.S. Congress. And so when we talk about, the Respect for Marriage Act, we really have to kind of pull back time and go back to 1996 and understand the Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed into law by then President Bill Clinton, which, defined that the federal government, and I'm going to read it. So it defines marriage for federal purposes as a union between one man and one woman. So this is signed under a Democrat president, in 1996, which again outlines how the federal government approaches marriage and what is marriage, defines marriage. And then, of course, in 2015, we have now to go to Oberville versus Hodges. And here we have a unilateral decision, not by a unanimous court, but the Supreme Court imposed, the issue of same-sex union as being that of the law of the land. The very same reality we saw with Roe v. Wade. And as a result, now, since the overturning of Roe v. Wade on June 24th of this year, and then a statement made by Justice Clarence Thomas, which really no one should have been surprised by, because if, as the justices said in the overturning of Roe and overturning of Casey, that these so-called rights were invented. They're not in the Constitution. So now that means it opens up the conversation to other issues that revolve around so-called privacy rights. This is one of them. And so this sparked, obviously, the whole LGBT community, Colleen. It sparked, obviously, the Democrat Party, which is really, this who's driving this train. And so now they want to call it, to look at DOMA, overturn DOMA, and then enshrine into federal law that what they call now the Respect for Marriage, which means it identifies that here, and I'm going to read for it, is that if passed, it would officially repeal DOMA and would say that it would require the federal government to recognize same-sex and interracial marriages. So this is what it would do. And so as a result, and it's using the language, taken from the definition of the bill. And so this is where it is. So now it has a title, Respect for Marriage. So most of our listenership and most of our readership, and I would say a good majority of good, faithful Christians who recognize marriage as between one man and one woman, open to the gift of human life, would look at the title and say, oh, good, the government's finally recognizing, that marriage. No, this is a problem. And so that's why I wanted to make sure we knew the history to understand what currently is the law was until the Supreme Court in 2015 imposed same-sex marriage union upon this nation, which then made that basically any state could do nothing to advance its own interest and common good. Now, what we see here is the Congress, particularly run by definitely being managed, overseen by the Democrat Party here. Now it's in the Senate. It's already passed the House in July of this year, and now it's in the Senate. And so this is why we want people to be aware. We need to call our senators and say no to this.
And when you say DOMA, you're talking about the Defense of Marriage Act, right?
Correct. So DOMA, D-O-M-A.
Yeah, yes. 1996. Okay. And then you said that it's in the Senate right now. Do you know when they're thinking of voting on it? Do we know that yet?
Well, there's already been a few, let's say, in a sense, attempts. So obviously those who are pushing this forward are testing the waters with various senators. And as we saw in the House, very sadly and tragically, I think it was 47, it's under 50, Republican congressmen went with the agenda. And now what we're seeing in the Senate is obviously the attempt to find those who are midline, who might be more open to this. And obviously the whole midterm elections it drives this as well. So right now, from what I've read, even this morning, and before beginning our podcast, knowing this afternoon we would be doing this, our podcast today, I wanted to see what the latest thing was. And from what I'm seeing, that it's going to be after the upcoming midterms. But I don't put anything past those with this agenda and ideology. So we need to really be be vigilant. We need to be more aggressive in a sense of getting involved, educate ourselves on what actually is this HR bill, this House bill that's now before the Senate, and to really get in touch with our own senators and voice our discontent and our rejection of this move. And so I think that's why it really caught my attention. And I've talked about it before in other articles, but I wanted to really bring our audience back to the conversation again, especially now that it's moved through the House, and we already know that if it passes the Senate, it'll be signed by this by this president.
Yes. And then practically, well, you were saying that the Supreme Court made the decision in 2015. So practically, will this change anything immediately in our country, or is this more for a long-term protection, many quotes around that,
right?
Just in case the court case is repealed.
So if this bill were to be then passed by, obviously to pass the Senate and then be signed into law by the President of the United States, it becomes the law of the land. And so what this now does is it takes it, so in a sense, though the Supreme Court in Oberville, made its statement and made it the law of the land, but what this would do now is it would enshrine it on a federal level, federal government level, on every of the states. So it would make it very difficult for any of the states to challenge. Right now you can challenge as we already have seen cases come before the Supreme Court. Kind of trying to whittle away, at the restrictions of Oberville versus Hodges. So right now, what this would do is it would become the new law of the land. So it would, in a sense, negate the Oberville, because it's no longer, you have a new law, very much like we're seeing with Roe. I think it's good for people to see the connection. So as you're seeing right now within the pro-abortion industry is wanting to bring new federal law to bear. So they're trying to get some new bill to become law that would now enshrine abortion, the so-called right to abortion, on a federal level. And so that, again, would prevent the states from advancing its own common good, its own law for its own people. And you can imagine how this would affect, and I think that's what, Colleen, this will do. It's going to make it very difficult for states that actually have laws, that are wanting to advance our understanding of marriage between one man and one woman. It would make people like you and myself, who are having this podcast, labeled as discriminating against those who want to be in a same-sex relationship and so-called marriage. And so it make it very difficult. And that's what we have to be aware of here. And that's why we don't want to see this advance any further. And what we want to see is the understanding that for the common good, and this is what we quoted some of the Catholic bishops in their statements, and particularly Archbishop Cardinal Leon, which we'll talk about shortly. But it's the idea that there is a good for society in marriage between one man and one woman, open to the gift of human life. And we know that this is a complementary relationship of man and woman, and only in that act of conjugal love between a man and a woman is life able to come forth into this world in the natural manner. So we know that this is something that we got to keep bringing before people, and unfortunately, people's sensitivities, to this issue has been compromised. People are more sadly prone to just accept this as a reality, and what we've seen is that if this were to move forward, it's not a let live. We're seeing what happens. I mean, we see how businesses, that do not want to support the same-sex understanding of union, and how that's been brought before the Supreme Court many times. There's case after case of this. So it's very important to see how this will impact everybody if this were to become the law of the land.
And then I think we kind of covered it a little bit, but the motivation for passing the bill was because of Dobbs. That was kind of what sparked this.
Yeah. So again, just kind of go back to, if people can go back and read the comment. Actually, I would since you brought it up, Colleen, I would encourage our listeners, to if you have not read the decision of the overturning of Roe, where it would be very important to do so. Alito, who writes the majority opinion, it's a little over 200 pages. And it will take a little time to navigate through, but it's beautifully written. It gives a clear understanding of the Constitution and what the Constitution actually says, and so because of that statement, and because of the concurrent statement of Justice Clarence Thomas, and then some post interviews and comments, he makes note that obviously the issue of Oberville is an example here. So those who are trying to push this realize that Oberville is next on the block, and others like that law that have been pushed upon us as a nation because of the kind of the activism of the court. And so that is incited the whole community of the LGBT community and those advancing same-sex unions and other agendas to see that they have to do a new law. We have to do this. This is what's driving the Respect for Marriage Act. This is what's driving it. So that's why it would radically change, because it would no longer be the court in Oberville that is governing the law. It now becomes a new law.
Well, it's interesting, too, because that almost seems like they're admitting that Oberville was a not legitimate constitutional right. That, like, if they're afraid that it's going to get overturned based on this,
right.
I guess it depends on how the mindset that you're approaching the constitutional rights from. But it's interesting that they see that it's very, not very likely to fall, but that it's a clear one that could be attacked.
But even a new law can be challenged in the court, and it will.
That's true.
There's no doubt it will. But this would give them extra leverage for a long period of time. And it's as we know, it takes a tremendous amount of effort, to challenge a law. That's going to have to make its way all the way through the court. So right now they have in Oberville what is needed in their mindset, but they know that because of the overturning of Roe, that now the possibility in the current court that this can also be overturned and returned back to the states. So this is where Roe has now returned. Well, the issue of abortion has returned to the states, and that's what's going on right now in our upcoming elections and midterms and so forth. And so this would be another example that if and again, I think for our listeners, it's not like the court today can just pick up a case, the Supreme Court we're talking about here, and just say, okay, let's look at this one today. No, it has to be challenged through the system, and it basically be received by a case brought to the court for the court to consider. And in this case, as we saw with the Dobbs case out of Mississippi, that the court received it and then received challenges and so forth, and that's how we got to June 24th. And so now with Oberville, another case can come forward challenging. There are cases already there. So this is what, again, those who are advocating for the federal government to enshrine, same-sex union, so quote marriage, into force every state. They know what's at stake. And so this is what's motivating. This is what's driving. So for all of us, it is something we need to take seriously because this is going to affect every one of us. It already affects us, all right? But right now, through the legal system, we can defend our rights, from our religious understanding, from our understanding of marriage. We can, like the cases about the baker, who wanted to make a wedding cake. This case has been come before the court a couple of times. There are other cases just like it. And so we have the mechanism to challenge the current standing. So, but now if this were to happen, we'd have to pull back and start all over again because we have a new law. Now it's got to be challenged. So I think that's, and they know that. And I think that's what's important. And we don't want, and sadly, with respect to so many of our people in our country, that framework, that understanding of marriage has been so compromised, as I said earlier, that we have a challenge here to move something forward. Yeah. Because people have almost just come to accept it and see it as almost normalized. And that's
when media pushes to make it look normal and all of that
Exactly, Colleen. So I think this, like anything else, will present a larger challenge to us to address the issues
So
if this
we could
were to
just
happen.
stop it right now, then we don't need to worry about it.
Exactly. And we
I
know
mean,
that
we
they're going to
still
try it
will, but-
again. We know that that this is not the first time they've tried to do this. So, but it's important for people to learn, to understand what is happening, not to turn a blind eye to what is happening on the federal level, and to really recognize that though we're hearing that this has now been shifted to after the midterm election, again, I don't trust that. And so it means I would call upon all of our listeners, to reach out to their senators and say no to this, that we vote against this. We do not want to see this advanced. And I would say that we need to take it to the poll as well in our voting. So in our midterm election, we need to put people in position that, share our understanding and value of marriage between one man and one woman, and to advance this. And of course, as Archbishop Cardinal Leon said, let's make it very clear, the Catholic Church and we right here are not advancing any act of discrimination or advancing any person who is in a sense of a same-sex relationship. We're not advocating for them to be mistreated or in that nature at all. So if they read the column, read what Archbishop Cardinal Leon has said. And the statement of the bishops makes it very clear what is the position of the Catholic Church in this regard. And I say that because I think it needs to be read in its entirety to make sure that one understands what is the Catholic position on this issue, and make sure that we can articulate that, because oftentimes they want to pigeonhole and say the Church is against, and treat us as if we're discriminating against a certain segment of the population, and we're not. And so I think it's important to understand what the Church teaches here.
Yeah, I agree. And then what can our listeners do about this bill? I think you mentioned, calling your senator. Is that the big
Right.
thing that we can do?
I think a number of things, Colleen. One, call the senator. Definitely. Call the senator's office. Voice your concern. Number two, bring our skills to bear. I bet many people in our community, in our districts, don't know what's happening. They're unaware. Talk to our family members. This is also a moment to educate people on what are our Judeo-Christian principles, what are our values. And even though there may be some, sadly, within the Christian fold that have given way to this ideology, it is not is God's divine plan, and we need to be honest about this, and we need to educate people about it, which means talk to our family members and not be afraid of being pushed back. But we need to educate. I would say another example would be like yourself, Colleen, and myself, who like to write and talk about these issues. There are many people with great talent. Write the local paper, whether it gets published or not. Try it. Get out there. We need to bring to the public forum. What the other side does is tries to silence our voices. We know that we're up against the media because the media is not going to side with us, not even give us an opportunity. And if we were to try to publicize this in some of the social platforms, we would not fit their definition of so-called how we approach a subject. We would be removed. We would be silenced. So we have to be creative, Colleen, in how we bring this. And I really think it's more person to person. And so that when people, if they call their senator's office and they receive enough pushback from their constituents, it does move a pendulum. And I think with the midterm elections, hey, if we got someone that's not advocating for what we believe and hold, that's where you voice your next ability and say, no, I'm voting against you. I do not want to see this advanced, and you're not advancing what I believe to be good. And so we need to do that.
Yeah. And then what are some of the problems with recognizing these unions, I guess, as legal, quote, marriages? Now, why, from a legal person, I guess a lot of people do what you were saying, the live and let live. It's just a legal thing. So what is the actual issues with doing that?
Well, let's return back to Cardinal Leon, Archbishop Cardinal Leon, because I purposely brought it with me because I think it's important. And I would once again say to our listeners, read the whole statement. You can come to my column, There's a link. It'll bring you immediately to the bishop's statement that Archbishop Cardinal Leon of San Francisco on behalf of the U.S. bishops, all right? So in this case, he's the chairman on laity, marriage, and family and youth. So this is why he is one who has penned on behalf of the bishops the letter. But I want to quote from it. He says, talking about discrimination here. He says that it is not discrimination to hold fast to the principle that an inherent aspect of the definition of marriage itself is the complementarity between the two sexes. So this is why we go back to, this is not, by me saying no to this, it's not an act of discrimination. That's clear. He also says, marriage is a lifelong exclusive union of one man and one woman open to new life. Is not just a religious ideal. It is on the whole what is best for society in a concrete sense, especially for children. So again, these are just little excerpts, but they're important to speak to the argument why we uphold the traditional understanding of marriage between a man and a woman. I would say the natural institution, all right? That predates the state. We've talked about this, Colleen. So this is why the state is imposing something upon marriage that it doesn't have the right to do. Marriage is a natural institution that predates government, predates the state. And so it doesn't have a right, to do what it's attempting to do. The Archbishop then goes on to say, now I add a few things of my own here, but, the Archbishop Cardinal Leon, takes aim at the talking points that you hear in the social media, especially those advocating and also, protecting this move that we see. And he says, it's simply a matter of choosing to live and let live, right? In reality, the Archbishop notes, the legalization of same-sex marriage has always been closely followed by attacks on the rights of those who oppose the redefinition of marriage. So it's not live and let live, all right? It's really pushing an ideology, enshrining that ideology, and then forcing everyone to live that ideology. And so to reject our core principles, to reject what we understand about the natural institution of marriage, to reject what is common sense about the fact that only one man and one woman in an act of conjugal love can be open to the gift of human life. It's the only way that life is possible to be conceived. And so we're being told to reject that because we have modern technologies today that can, and that's a whole nother subject. And we talked about the commodification of human life before. So I think it's important, to see how the church is approaching the subject, how we can respond as Catholics to this issue, how as Christians we should be responding to this issue. So unfortunately, there's division there. But as a Catholic Church, we have a very clear understanding of the principle that we uphold, and we want to advance those principles. So I would, again, ask our listenership to come to the link, click on that link, read the entire statement, and bring it with you, to your coffee table, if you will, and let it be that which helps you articulate what the church is speaking about here. And obviously, it's not going to be all contained in one place. The Catechism of the Catholic Church would be great for our listeners to reacquaint themselves with. What does the church teach about marriage? And what has the church received? Because remember, marriage is a natural institution created by God. And so what is the church responsible for upholding? Okay, the church itself can't create a teaching either here. It can't change that which is unchangeable. And so this is, again, what the Archbishop is raising and what the bishops are raising and what we should be raising. And we know from study after study, which again are the left and those who are promoting this ideology refuse to accept, study after study has shown that children are healthier being raised by their biological mother and biological father. And so we see this, but again, that's not going to get published. You're not going to see that in the headlines on the local news. But these are the studies that are out there. So we have enough to stand on and to be articulate in advancing.
Okay. Do you have any other? I think we're going to be running out of our time. We're trying to do about a half an hour podcast. So do you have anything more you'd like to say before we start wrapping this one up?
Be not afraid. I think that, it's very difficult, and I can tell you I'm working with people who are in Congress, in our U.S. Congress, state Congresses, who are advancing what we are talking about, the beauty of marriage, the wonder of marriage, and wanting to protect that sacred institution. They're fighting the fight, and they're standing their ground. They need our help. And so they're not afraid. And they need us not to be afraid. And they need us to support them in their effort, to advance what is true about marriage and to make sure that we don't enshrine into law what undermines marriage and actually undermines our society and undermines the common good. And so we have much at stake here. So we can't be afraid, and we can't allow ourselves to be intimidated, Colleen. We have to be bold, patient, always respectful, but bold, and say and literally, this is not good, and it's not going to be good, and even if we try to redefine it, doesn't change it in the sense of what marriage really is. And it's so we need to be able to get out there and let others know, and especially our senators. Right now, the battle is in the Senate, and so that's why the House already has done this, unfortunately. So we need to take our argument to our senators. So please do so. So be not afraid.
Thank you, Father. And also for our listeners, we're going to be doing a part 2 follow-up to this on Title IX and how they're pushing the agenda through by changing Title IX. So keep an eye out for that coming up soon. And in the meantime, follow, subscribe. Thank you for listening. If you're listening on our audio platforms, share with your friends. If you're listening on YouTube or Rumble, please follow, and subscribe. And keep on living a culture of life. God bless.